Chosen one. There's a moment that doesn't look like success at all. It doesn't come with applause or validation or even clarity. It feels quiet, almost confusing. You look at your life, and instead of seeing clear progress, you see distance. Distance between who you used to be and who you're becoming. And somewhere in that space, something subtle starts to shift. Not loudly, not dramatically, but enough that you can't go back to thinking the way you used to. That shift is what most people overlook. But it's often the beginning of something much bigger than they realize. You might have noticed that lately, your priorities don't match the environment around you anymore. Conversations that used to feel normal now feel surface level. Goals that once excited you now feel incomplete. It's not that anything is wrong. It's just that your internal compass is recalibrating. And that can feel isolating. Because growth doesn't always announce itself as progress. Sometimes it shows up as discomfort. Sometimes it shows up as disconnection. You're not losing direction. You're outgrowing an old one. The first sign something deeper is unfolding in your life is this quiet detachment from things that once defined you. There was a time when external validation mattered more. Recognition, approval, fitting into certain expectations, it all carried weight. But now, even when you receive those things, they don't land the same way. You're not as reactive, not as dependent on outcomes. At first, that can feel like you're losing motivation. But in reality, something more refined is happening. You're no longer driven by noise. You're starting to respond to alignment. And alignment is quieter. It doesn't rush you. It doesn't pressure you. It pulls you. Another shift that often goes unnoticed is how you begin to handle uncertainty. Before, not knowing what's next might have triggered anxiety. You needed clear steps, guarantees, reassurance. But now, even though you still think about the future, there's a different relationship with it. You're more patient, more observant. You don't feel the same urgency to force outcomes. And this isn't passivity. It's awareness. You're starting to understand that not every phase of life is meant for acceleration. Some phases are meant for positioning, for learning, for recalibrating, for building something internal before anything external shows up. There's also a noticeable change in how you process setbacks. Things still go wrong. Plans still don't unfold the way you expected. But instead of immediately reacting, you pause. You analyze. You reflect. You ask different questions now. Not, why is this happening to me? But what is this showing me about where I am? That shift alone changes everything. Because now, every challenge becomes data. Every delay becomes insight. You're no longer just experiencing life. You're studying it. And more importantly, you're studying yourself within it. At some point, you may have realized that your environment doesn't fully understand your direction anymore. And that's not a criticism of them. It's just that you're operating on a different frequency of thought. You're thinking long-term. You're questioning patterns. You're becoming more intentional. And not everyone around you is focused on that. So conversations feel shorter. Connections feel different. Not worse. Just different. And this is where many people get uncomfortable. Because humans naturally want to belong. But growth sometimes requires you to sit in that in-between space, where you no longer fully resonate with your past, but haven't fully stepped into your future yet. Another sign that you're stepping into a higher path is your relationship with discipline. It's no longer about forcing yourself. You're not relying on motivation the way you used to. Instead, there's a growing sense of responsibility toward your own potential. You start doing things not because you feel like it, but because you understand what they build over time. Small actions begin to matter more. Consistency becomes more important than intensity. You start thinking in terms of systems instead of bursts of effort. And this is where things begin to compound. Because the external world responds to consistency far more than it does to occasional effort. And without even realizing it, you're building something stable. There's also a deeper awareness forming around how you use your time. You begin to notice where your attention goes. What drains you? What actually moves you forward? And slowly, you start making adjustments. Not perfectly, but intentionally. You reduce distractions. You become more selective with your energy. And this doesn't happen overnight. It happens in small decisions. Choosing focus over impulse. Choosing long-term over immediate comfort. And over time, those choices reshape your entire direction. As this process continues, your identity starts to shift. Not in a dramatic, sudden way, but gradually. You start seeing yourself differently. Not based on past mistakes. Not based on old labels, but based on who you're actively becoming. And this is where things begin to feel real. Because identity drives behavior. Once you no longer see yourself as someone who settles, or someone who hesitates, or someone who doubts their direction, your actions begin to reflect that. You move differently. You decide faster. You trust yourself more. And that internal shift eventually shows up externally. There's a moment in this journey where you stop chasing outcomes and start building capacity. Capacity to think clearly. Capacity to stay consistent. Capacity to handle pressure without breaking focus. And this is where real growth happens. Because outcomes fluctuate, but capacity stays with you. It becomes your foundation. And once that foundation is strong enough, the external results begin to align naturally. What most people don't realize is that the billionaire path isn't about money at the beginning. It's about structure, mindset, decision-making. It's about becoming the type of person who can manage, sustain, and grow something meaningful. And that process starts internally, long before anything shows up externally. You may not see dramatic results yet, but you feel the shift. In your thinking, in your habits, in your awareness. And that matters more than it seems. Because visible success is often just a reflection of invisible changes that have been happening for a long time. As you move forward, the most important thing is not speed. It's alignment. Not perfection, but consistency. Not comparison, but clarity. Because once you're aligned with your direction, even slow progress becomes powerful. And maybe that's where you are right now. Not at the finish line. Not even close. But no longer at the beginning either. You're in that space where things are shifting internally, even if the outside hasn't fully caught up yet. And that space matters more than most people think. If any part of this resonated with your current phase, take a moment to reflect on it. Not everything needs to be figured out immediately. Sometimes clarity comes from simply paying attention to the shifts already happening within you. And if you want to share what part stood out to you the most, you can say it below, chosen one. There's another layer to this that most people don't talk about. It's not just that your mindset is changing. It's that your tolerance is changing. Things you once tolerated, whether it was chaos, inconsistency, or even your own habits, start to feel heavier than before. Not because they suddenly became worse, but because you became more aware. Awareness raises your standards automatically. And once that happens, You can't comfortably exist in the same patterns without feeling that internal friction. That friction isn't a problem. It's feedback. It's your mind signaling that you've outgrown a certain version of yourself. There's a point where you start noticing how much of your past behavior was reactive. You reacted to circumstances. You reacted to emotions. You reacted to what others expected from you. But now there's a pause between stimulus and response. And in that pause, you're starting to choose. That's a powerful shift. Because when you begin choosing your responses instead of defaulting to them, you regain control over your direction. And control, in this sense, doesn't mean forcing everything to go your way. It means you're no longer controlled by everything around you. You may also find yourself becoming more comfortable with silence. Not just external silence, but internal silence. Less overthinking. Less constant mental noise. At first, this can feel unfamiliar. You might even wonder if you've lost some of your drive. But what's actually happening is different. You're becoming more focused. Instead of scattering your attention across everything, you're starting to direct it with intention. And that level of focus is rare. Because most people are constantly distracted, constantly reacting, constantly consuming. But you're beginning to create space. And in that space, clarity grows. Another shift you might notice is how you handle comparison. There was a time when seeing others succeed could trigger doubt. It could make you question your own pace. But now, something about that feels less intense. You're starting to understand that different paths have different timelines, different variables, different starting points. And more importantly, different purposes. So instead of comparing outcomes, you start focusing on your own process, your own growth, your own trajectory. And that shift protects your energy, because comparison often drains focus. But clarity restores it. You're also becoming more aware of your decision-making patterns. You start asking yourself deeper questions. Is this aligned with where I'm going? Is this a distraction or a step forward? And sometimes, that awareness leads to uncomfortable realizations. You might notice how often you used to choose short-term comfort over long-term growth, or how certain decisions were influenced by fear rather than clarity. But instead of judging yourself for it, you start adjusting. That's the difference now. You're not stuck in analysis. You're applying what you notice. And that application is what creates change. There's also a shift in how you view effort. Before, effort might have felt like something you had to force. You needed motivation, momentum, the right mood. But now, you're starting to understand effort as a baseline. Not something optional, but something consistent. You show up even when it's not exciting. You continue even when progress feels slow. And this is where most people fall off. Because consistency isn't always rewarding in the moment. But over time, it separates those who build something real from those who stay in cycles of starting and stopping. At some point, you also begin to recognize the value of delayed results. You understand that not everything you're doing will show immediate feedback. Some actions take time to compound. And instead of getting discouraged by that delay, you start respecting it. You begin to see time as part of the process, not an obstacle to it. And that perspective changes how you approach everything. You become more patient, more strategic. You stop chasing quick wins and start building something sustainable. There's a deeper emotional shift happening as well. You're becoming less reactive to external opinions. Not because you don't care at all, but because you care more about alignment than approval. You start trusting your judgment more. And that trust doesn't come from arrogance. It comes from experience, from observing yourself, adjusting, learning, and growing over time. And once that trust is built, you don't need constant validation to keep moving forward. Another subtle but powerful sign is how you approach failure. It no longer feels like a final judgment. It feels like feedback, something to learn from, something to refine. And this shift removes a lot of fear. Because when failure is no longer something you avoid at all costs, you become more willing to take calculated risks. You become more open to trying, adjusting, improving. And that openness accelerates growth in ways that hesitation never could. You may also notice that your circle, your environment, or even your routines start changing. Not always by force, sometimes naturally. You drift away from certain dynamics. You gravitate toward different ones. And while that can feel uncertain at times, it's part of the process. Because your environment either supports your direction or slows it down. And as your awareness increases, you begin to choose environments more intentionally. There's also a growing sense of responsibility. Not pressure, but responsibility. A quiet understanding that your choices matter, that your time matters, that your potential matters. And instead of ignoring that, you start responding to it. You take your growth more seriously, not in a stressful way, but in a focused way. And that focus becomes a driving force. As all of this builds, something important starts to happen. You stop looking for shortcuts, not because they don't exist, but because you understand their limitations. You realize that lasting results come from depth, not speed. From building skills, habits, and systems that can actually support what you're aiming for. And once you adopt that mindset, your entire approach changes. You're no longer rushing. You're building. There's a point where you begin to see patterns more clearly. Patterns in your behavior, patterns in your results, patterns in your thinking. And this awareness gives you an advantage. Because once you can see a pattern, you can change it. You're no longer operating on autopilot. You're becoming intentional. And that's where the real transformation happens. Not in one big moment, but in a series of small, consistent shifts. Each one building on the last. Each one moving you slightly closer to alignment. Until eventually, those small shifts create a completely different reality. You may not call it a billionaire path. You may not even define it yet. But what you're stepping into is a higher level of awareness, a higher level of discipline, a higher level of responsibility. And those qualities, over time, shape outcomes in ways that most people underestimate. So if things feel different right now, if your mindset feels like it's evolving, if your habits are shifting, if your perspective is expanding, that's not random. That's progress, even if it doesn't look like it yet. And as you continue forward, the key is to stay consistent with these internal shifts, to trust the process enough to keep building, even when results aren't immediately visible. Because eventually, what's happening internally will reflect externally. If you've been noticing these changes within yourself, take a moment to really acknowledge them. Growth isn't always obvious while it's happening, but recognizing it can give you the clarity to keep going. And if any part of this reflects where you are right now, you can share your perspective below, chosen one. There's a stage in this journey that feels almost invisible from the outside, but internally, it changes everything. It's the stage where you stop asking, when will things happen? And start asking, who do I need to become to handle what I'm building? That question alone shifts your entire focus. Because now you're not chasing outcomes anymore. You're developing capacity. And capacity, quietly determines everything that follows. You begin to notice that the way you handle pressure has changed. Situations that once overwhelmed you now feel like something you can navigate. Not perfectly, but with more control, more awareness. You don't shut down as quickly. You don't react as impulsively. You stay present longer. And that ability to remain steady when things aren't perfect is one of the most valuable traits you can build. Because pressure doesn't disappear at higher levels. It increases. And the version of you that can handle it is the version that moves forward. There's also a deeper shift in how you define success. It's no longer just about visible results. It's about stability, clarity, control over your own direction. You start valuing structure over excitement, because excitement fades quickly, but structure sustains progress. And once you build structure into your daily life, into how you think, how you act, how you manage your time, you create something reliable, something repeatable, something that doesn't collapse under pressure. At this point, distractions start losing their grip on you. Not because they disappear, but because you see through them. You recognize what pulls your attention without adding value. And instead of constantly fighting distractions, you simply stop giving them importance. That's a different level of discipline. It's not forced. It's understood. You're no longer negotiating with yourself every day. You've already decided what matters. You may also notice that your pace feels different. You're not rushing the way you used to. But you're also not stuck. You're moving with intention. Every step has a reason. Every action connects to something bigger. And even when progress feels slow, there's a sense of direction behind it. That direction is what keeps you grounded. Because without direction, speed doesn't mean anything. But with direction, even slow movement becomes powerful. There's a moment where you realize that your mindset has outgrown your old environment. And that realization can feel uncomfortable. Because it creates a gap between where you are and where you know you're going. But that gap is necessary. It's the space where transformation happens. It's where you refine your thinking, your habits, your identity, before stepping into something bigger. And here, where everything starts to come together, you understand that this path isn't about luck. It isn't about sudden breakthroughs. It's about accumulation. Small decisions, repeated daily, thought patterns, refined over time, actions, aligned with purpose. And when those elements stack consistently, they create momentum. Not the loud, temporary kind, but the quiet, unstoppable kind. This is where the identity shift becomes undeniable. You're no longer trying to become someone. You're already acting like the person you needed to become. Your habits reflect it. Your mindset reflects it. Your decisions reflect it. And once your identity aligns with your direction, progress stops feeling forced. It becomes natural. There's also a deeper level of self-trust forming. You don't second-guess every move anymore. You think, you decide, you act, and even if something doesn't go as planned, you adjust without losing confidence. Because now you understand something important. You don't need every decision to be perfect. You just need to keep moving forward with awareness. At this stage, you stop looking for validation completely. Not because you don't value feedback, but because your direction doesn't depend on it. You're internally guided now. Your standards come from within. And that independence is powerful. Because it removes hesitation. It removes doubt. It allows you to move with clarity. And this is where most people start to notice the difference. Not because you're telling them, but because your actions speak differently. Your consistency stands out. Your focus stands out. Your ability to stay grounded while others fluctuate stands out. And that's when opportunities begin to appear. Not randomly, but as a reflection of who you've become. So when you think about the idea of a billionaire path, understand it like this. It's not about a number. It's about becoming someone who can create, manage, and multiply value. It's about thinking long-term, acting with intention, building with consistency, and most importantly, staying aligned even when results take time. Right now, you're in the phase where everything is being built internally. Your discipline, your awareness, your identity. And while it may not always feel exciting, this is the most important phase, because everything that comes later depends on this foundation. So don't rush this part. Don't overlook these shifts just because they're quiet. Because what you're building right now is what will support everything ahead. And here's something to really sit with. If you continue on this path, staying consistent, staying aware, staying intentional, your future won't be something you hope for. It will be something you've prepared for. Take a moment and think about where you were mentally a year ago. Look at how you handled situations back then. Look at how you thought, how you reacted, how you approached things. Now compare that to where you are right now. That difference didn't happen overnight. It happened through small, consistent shifts. And the same process is shaping your future at this very moment. So instead of waiting for a sign that everything is about to change, recognize that it already is. In your mindset, in your habits, in your awareness. And those internal changes are the real indicators of progress. Now here where it becomes real. Not just something you listen to, but something you engage with. If you've made it this far, it means something in this connected with you on a deeper level. Not because of hype, not because of promises, but because you recognize the shift within yourself. So don't just move on from this like it's another video. Pause for a moment. Think about one area in your life where you've already started changing. One habit you've improved. One mindset you've outgrown. One decision you're now making differently. Acknowledge it, because awareness strengthens progress. And if you're serious about continuing this path, start showing up for it consistently. Not in a perfect way, but in a real way. Pay attention to your decisions. Refine your habits. Stay aligned with your direction. That's where the real shift happens. If this perspective added clarity to where you are right now, you can share your thoughts below. Not for validation, but to put your awareness into words. Sometimes, expressing where you are helps you understand it even better. And if you choose to keep going on this path, do it with intention. Because the version of you you're becoming is built by what you do consistently from here.